Welcome to Murphy's Law and Whitetails, your guide to North America's #1 big game animal. Today's topic is factors affecting a buck's breeding success. In other words, how many fawns does a given buck produce in a single year or perhaps even throughout their lifetime? You know, it wasn't that long ago that we had to rely on folklore. And the belief was that if we were lucky enough to have one of these great bucks on our property, that as long as it wasn't shot prior to the rut, that a buck like this would surely kick tail and take names and breed every doe in the area, thereby passing on its wonderful genetics to the next generation. Thanks to advancements in modern DNA technology, we're able to apply this science to free-ranging deer herds and get a lot of insight as to which bucks do the breeding and which don't. Dr. Randy DeYoung, a good friend of mine, and his colleagues at Mississippi State looked at parentage or buck breeding success at 3 different study sites. One was a traditionally managed property in Mississippi, one was a quality managed property in Oklahoma, and one was a trophy managed area in South Texas. And what they did in each of these areas is go in and collect as much DNA from as many animals as they could through harvested deer, live captured deer, shed antlers, and even incidental dead finds. And they were able to create a family relatedness tree, a parentage tree, if you will, and assign parentage to bucks in terms of which fawns they sired. And they felt that they were able to get about half of the fawns on all of these areas in terms of assigning parentage to them. So you can kind of double the results as I share them. When they looked at which age groups of bucks were most responsible for siring fawns, the results weren't particularly surprising. 2/3 of all fawns were sired by bucks 3.5 and older. However, that means that 1/3 of all fawns were sired by 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks, those youngsters, even in South Texas on the famed King Ranch, which had a very high adult buck age structure. When they looked at individual season buck breeding success, the average buck only sired somewhere about 1 to 3 fawns per year that survived into the next year's population. When they looked at lifetime breeding success, the results were similarly interesting. Over the course of a deer's lifetime, the average buck only contributed about 6 fawns or less throughout their entire lifetime. The top buck in their study produced 14 fawns over a 7-year period. What they also found, which was very interesting, is that a relatively small yet significant number of bucks showed no evidence of breeding success whatsoever throughout their entire lifetime. These appeared to be non-breeders. Research from red deer and other parts of the world show that this is not uncommon, that in fact in many cases these really large antlered red deer are non-breeders. And it makes sense. If these animals aren't putting themselves through the rigors of the rut, losing the body weight, getting into fights and injuries, they have more time and energy to invest in antler development. So the take-home message here is that a lot of bucks are contributing a little bit. And that makes sense because of the whitetail's breeding strategy. The whitetail is a solo specialist. In other words, they work one-on-one, chasing and courting an estrus doe and then staying with her 24 to 48 hours to breed her during that peak estrus period, and having to peel off and look for another deer, and so on. And if the rut only lasts 2 or 3 weeks, there's only so many times a buck can find a receptive doe during that period. Unlike elk and other herding deer species, which gather large groups of females and can breed all of those females as long as they can defend them from their rivals. So it's a good news, bad news story here. The good news is that it's almost impossible to quote-unquote mess up your genetics by harvesting the wrong deer. However, the bad news is that it's equally difficult, if not impossible, to improve your genetics by harvesting the right deer. So the take-home message here is very clear. Focus on what you can control and what has repeatedly shown to make a difference: age and nutrition, and simply don't fret over genetics. That's it for today's episode of Murphy's Law. Hope you learned something. And until next time, be sure to leave your questions and your comments here in the video, but also to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to check out all the great content at HuntStand.com.